And yep.
Too much emphasis is placed on legality, and far too many people who are involved in the maybe negotiations or the diplomatic action are legally trained. And the assumption, as I see it, is that laws are legitimate almost by definition. But this disregards the fact that many of the laws that they themselves study are, let's say, the Roman laws or Justinian Code or Napoleonic Code, or laws basically established by people who wage major wars, gain empires or defeat enemies, and then laws are written, etc. Ultimately, despite all this, nobody managed to conquer the world, obviously, so there is no global law. And nation states themselves are, in the eyes of some people, including me, criminal organizations. So when you tailor policies based on the assumption that they will continue, the climate that they inherited, the climate within which they developed, will also continue, which is basically a system of anarchy. Whatever laws we can have is not going to provide enough security for us. And so one criticism would be to this legalistic thinking. Another one is a human-centered approach to security. All of what we discussed so far relates to a technology, but basically a human-made technology. And human beings, their intents, their institutions, etc. We're just one species out of 30 million plus on this planet, and the entire planet is not a safe planet. There are natural forces that we can't control, that we can't even properly protect ourselves from. Many of those natural disasters actually ended up preparing our dominance on this planet. We were not originally a dominant species, obviously. So maybe it's more difficult to think of alternatives that would do away with the nation states and the anarchy, obviously. Maybe it's too much homework for some people, but without that, I assume that we can have yet another setback to the anti-war movement through a legal agreement that would mean very little. For instance, the test ban treaty of the 60s, as I see it, dealt a serious blow to the anti-war movement. After that, a lot of people said, oh, okay, they conceded that, maybe they're not all irrational, okay, fine, let's go home. Likewise, biological and chemical weapons were banned. Is the world safe? And another way of approaching this is, you can have an armed conflict in which you can say both sides lose, or you can have a conflict or no conflict, but one side wins over another. Let's say between Bangladesh and India. They never go to wars, but whenever there is too much water, India dumps water into Bangladesh. When there is too little water, they keep it in their dams. And Bangladesh suffers. And what can they do? There are many sources of conflict where there may not actually be a physical struggle, etc., but one side continuously loses. Is that peace? Is that our understanding of peace? I mean, you can have a household where the husband gets away with murder and nobody rises up against the husband or the father. So there's no war, there's no conflict maybe, but everybody else loses. So likewise, when we think of nation states and empires and large countries continuing their existence, this is not necessarily a gain for most of humankind. It's not a win. And if you think of nation states, there are fewer than 200 nation states. There are thousands of ethnic groups that are dying to be nation states for whatever reason, I don't know. So their own national government is their enemy, their oppressor, or they overtax them or give them too few services, etc. So, we can't be myopic about just nuclear weapons, I'm afraid.
No, and I wouldn't say that that WILP or Peace Action or any group that I really know working on this issue is myopic. I tend to resist the argument or approach that we need to fix everything at once in order to be successful. So taking on the nation-state system as the way that we've organized ourselves globally, that's a project. Taking on violent technologies that humans have produced, that's a project. Taking on the myriad of human rights violations happening around the world, that's a project. All of these things, I think, are important to the overall project of taking us towards type of society or community as humans that we want to live in, however that's organized, and whether that's organized as a global solidarity based in human security with a completely different set of arrangements for how we're interacting with each other, that might be. But I don't think that we cannot tackle something like nuclear weapons until we've sorted out all those other problems. I think it's all part of the same project, and I think this is a piece of the puzzle. I think that it has implications that go well beyond nuclear weapons as its own technology. I think we're seeing this from the way that we're trying to develop this particular treaty on nuclear weapons. We're building on a body of law, but also social understandings of violent technologies that have built up over time through the prohibitions of other weapons like biological and chemical weapons. Is the world safe because we outlawed them? No, of course not. There's still many other problems in the world that need to be fixed. But outlawing biological and chemical weapons has provided us with a platform to outlaw nuclear weapons. Same with the cluster munitions, same with landmines. These are all part of humanitarian disarmament geared towards achieving human security, upholding human rights. Does it solve all problems? No, of course not. It's a piece of the puzzle. And I think that understanding its place in the trajectory of the broader social justice movements that we're a part of and the goals that we have to improve ourselves as a species in which we don't just communicate with each other through violence, I think it's all important work. So whatever our particular priorities are, whatever opportunities happen to be open, and this moment, this is the opportunity that's open to us in terms of weapons technologies. So we're trying to seize that whilst putting it into its broader context of peace and justice, I would say. Yes.